Okay.
So we're speeding? Everything good? All right. I think a good place to start is how you approached Detroit as a visual space and kind of the process of representing something like a city. Because the film strikes me as maybe having the least amount of dialogue of all of the films you've worked on.
That is true. I mean, it's the sound design and the music were an especially important layer for this film, because one of the many things about Detroit that's unusual for a city is that it's extremely quiet. As you know, there's not a lot of people there. There's not a lot of police. There's not a lot of ambulances. And they have a lot of services that aren't available. And, the wildlife has kind of started to take back over the city. So one of the results of that is that it is quiet. So that was actually something that we wanted to enhance. And we thought about when we were filming, because it's so unusual for a metropolis to be like that. So sound was a big part of it, but also visually it's extremely unique. I think that's why people have been photographing it like crazy lately. There's all these other films about it. People seem to be obsessed with it, and that is because it is incredibly unusual and distinct. So we, you can't help but film in a certain way, actually. I mean, it begs to be sort of studied and examined. And on top of it, it ended up being kind of like a love letter. So we filmed it through that lens as well. It was a huge departure for us as filmmakers, visually, soundscape, structurally, everything about it. But, visually really stands out as a total departure for us.
And you kind of obviously want to avoid the fetishization of decay that kind of defines those photography photo essays you're mentioning. And I think that is clearest kind of at the end when you have this space that would otherwise be shot empty, but you have someone singing in it. So I'm wondering how you kind of avoided that obstacle.
Right. Well, I could see how it would be very tempting to fetishize it, because it's startling and you can't keep your eyes off of it. But we did want to maintain some respect. And we thought that one way of, mitigating this temptation to just, to be spectators is to put the city in context to its citizens. So for instance, when we're going to explore an empty building, which, you would want to creep around and check it out, we do it with Crystal Starr, who is a resident there and does it, every day, and is extremely curious, sort of a modern archaeologist. And when we went into the train station, which is this iconic empty structure now, skeleton of this incredible, archaeological sort of masterpiece, we filmed Noah Stewart, who's this incredible tenor, wanted to go and sing and check out the acoustics. So again, we wanted it to sort of feel like there was life there. So these were things we kept in mind, that, we didn't want to just, kind of fall into the trap of capturing what is being called rune porn, and to, to make sure that the city was given some dignity.
The concept of kind of opera and even soul music as a counterpoint is also interesting, because it's something that is so tied up in class and race and kind of the segregation or segmentation, I would even say, that exists. What were you hoping to achieve by using this motif throughout?
Well, there was a lot of things that we had in mind, thinking about the opera and thinking about the sort of natural music that came from the Raven Blues Club. There's so many things. I mean, first and foremost, Heidi, my co-director, is from the area and has gone to that opera house her whole life. She's a huge opera fan, and for her, opera is actually a really big part of Detroit, which I think is very unusual, a surprising position for people not from the city. So, we like anything that's unexpected. So first and foremost, unexpected. But then also there's sort of this metaphor of Detroit being this operatic place, rise and fall, and rise again, and sort of, this very classic story that might end up being a redemption story, so there's something very operatic about it. But also, the audience that goes to see the opera are the affluent, white, suburban people that come into the city to enjoy the city. So we definitely wanted to include that population. We couldn't really do it overtly. We did it in this very seamless way, hopefully, because we didn't want to just insert this, but we did think it was important for that sort of information to be revealed. But what an incredible thing about cities is that there is all this influence, from different, economic class structures, and I mean that is what makes a city vibrant, is this melting pot. So we loved the idea of intermingling these genres that are so, that are surprising, but inadvertently end up being, interacting with each other in all cities.
And those two different registers is also something that happens with the concept of representation, because it seems like there's multiple layers of you documenting, other people kind of documenting or assessing the city. So you have like the photographers from Switzerland, you have the news crew that's photographing the destruction of a building, you have you have Crystal's vlogs, you have the mayor's kind of think tank of what we're going to do, and there's also even the archive footage that you kind of inject as well. So it tends to drift back about how the city gets represented. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on those observations.
Well, that's an interesting observation. I hadn't really thought about all of them. I definitely had thought about the fact that we're filming someone filming.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what we're hoping to do is represent the city on its own terms. And the way that we attempted to do that is to film people that could leave, that were lifelong Detroiters and that love their city and were tied to it for different reasons, mostly because they love it. And we felt like if we were able to show the city through their eyes, we could show, the flaws and the problems and the struggle, but we could also show the beauty and the love for this place. I think part of what we were feeling before we started the film is that a lot of these representations of the city that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years don't have people in them. They're empty. They're empty structures. And there's, 713,000 people there. There's a lot of people there. And it's not evident at all in sort of the way it's been represented. So we definitely wanted people to understand that this is a place that feels abandoned, that feels, echoey and empty, but in fact is filled with life, and there's life everywhere in pockets. So you need to, acknowledge that there's humans that are interacting with this place and that it's very much alive.
And the question of kind of bringing everyone into the center is something that when you don't have a narrator, you don't really kind of intervene ever. And what a viewer becomes aware of is how this kind of information there's a failure to communicate it to everyone. Like you see all of the different people reacting to what should just be a simple point, but seeing how it kind of breaks down.
You're talking about the community meeting.
Yeah. Well, I would even say the porch meeting as well, like the
right.
informal.
Yeah, it's true that it's like, there's not this consensus or this, it's true that the pool of information is sort of dissipated. And I think that's kind of how the city is, actually. There's not straight lines of communication. There's not a sense that people kind of everybody has to do something out of the ordinary to fix the situation. Status quo is just making it worse and worse. And I think that what you picked up on was a failure of the of the city government to really explain that they don't have any options, that there's nothing else they can do besides shrink the city and try these extremely innovative and unusual measures to get the city on its feet. Interesting. Yeah, this is the great thing about sharing a film, is that you get to actually, your point of view gets wider and wider as people give you theirs. So yeah, I mean, there's been a failure of community in Detroit for a long time, and I think that we're seeing the consequence of that.
And one way that's conveyed in the film is the structure, which is interesting because it's kind of like a network narrative. It's almost like an Altman film where you have all of these different people that are seemingly sharing a space, but they're really not. They're kind of segregated. And I'm wondering how you kind of came across that structure.
That's so funny that, he was Robert Altman was definitely an influence for making this film. Yeah, we were talking, we called them Altman moments. We talked about it the whole time. It's funny the way that you analyze that is opposite of how I kind of see it, which is that there's all of these strangers living in this place that actually are very much connected with each other and don't know the other exists. And the guy that runs the opera house and those guys on the porch, they have a lot in common. So, and you would never think that they're in different worlds. Yeah. But because they both live in this complicated, challenging place, they have infinitely more things in common than they don't. So it is actually something that could bring this community together in a really unusual and incredible way.
And I've read that they've seen, like the people who participate in the film have seen the film, and have they become more aware because of it that these other pockets exist?
Well, I think surely the people in our film have, the handful of people. But what's been really interesting is showing the film in Detroit and in the suburbs of Detroit and in Ann Arbor across the state of Michigan. From the screenings that we've been in, very interesting dialogue has, come out of it, as well as audiences that are very diverse. And Detroit happens to be a city that has suffered from incredibly bad racial divisions, which is, common throughout the U.S., but it has it in an incredibly entrenched and it's worse. It's worse there. And to get a group of people from all different races and classes in the same room in Detroit is not very common. So the very least, we've accomplished that with this film, to get people kind of in the same room thinking about these things and creating some awareness.
And it's interesting the way that could also apply to what seemed to be a motif with birds and dogs, like the two, like the stray dog and the kind of migratory bird, because it could mean two things. It can, of course, be the white migration out, but it could also be what the artists seem to do, which is see this freedom within Detroit and the opportunities it affords them.
Right. Well, it's true. Detroit has that sort of duality, which is that, people are either running towards it or running away from it. No one seems to be walking in either direction. So it's a very extreme place. And I think that's why a lot of people are looking at it now and paying attention to it, because it's kind of like, as Detroit goes, maybe so goes the nation. So it's definitely sort of a barometer. And hopefully, sorry, so gross. Hopefully is something that people take very seriously when they're looking at it. I think actually America is starting to look at Michigan in general, the state of Michigan, as something that they should pay very, very close attention to, especially the people on the coasts, who I think have been able to ignore basically the death of manufacturing in this country because it doesn't directly affect them in a way that they can see, but it turns out that it does affect them, because it is the heart of our economy in the United States, which has been shattered. So I think that there is a ripple effect. People are starting to really get it, what it means.
And there is this undercurrent of a kind of self-perception about America in the film, and it comes up with the various archival footage that represent Detroit specifically, but also the radio show, I believe, or something, where they're discussing how looking to other countries for the first time as like a model, and realizing that you have to work every day. And one line that like struck me was the whole we can't keep our heads in the sand,
Uh-huh.
right? So, and also the artists having to work, like they want to work every day.
Right.
The other problem is people who can't work every day.
Right.
So how does the film kind of fit into this, what seems to be
Identity.
a shifting self-perception? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this film is in some ways an identity film. Detroit is linked with this concept of the American dream. And the American dream means a lot of things to Americans, but also to the rest of the world. That's why immigrants come to America from everywhere, because there is this thing called the American dream where you work hard, you get the car, you get the house, you get the education, and you know, you get to have a certain quality of life. But the question was this particular definition of the dream, was it sustainable? Did we create a sustainable system? And I think as a lot of Americans are slipping into the working poor, it's starting to feel like it wasn't sustainable. And what can we do to reimagine how we can make it something that can work for a lot longer than 100 years?
And and some of those archival things, it's about the future, but this is a film that kind of resists looking ahead and is more kind of dealing with the present, it seems.
Right. Well, you know, this film is, we thought this was going to be a film about the future. That's, you know,
Okay.
We did. We went to Detroit with this idea that it was about, we had a different title for it. It was called Detroit Hustles Harder. It was a film about all these incredible innovations that were happening in a city that had the freedom to try everything because it, you know, could only go up. And we really thought this was a Phoenix from the Ashes story. And what it turned out to be something much more complicated. It's a story about consequences, and consequences for decisions that were made 30, 40, 60 years ago. This is what these decisions looks like now. So it's not a film about the past. It's not a film about the future. It's a film about right now across the country. You know, it's about a moment in time, a mood. You know, and that is what we were hoping to capture, this, you know, sort of national anxiety, this mood, and give it a visual, make it three-dimensional.
And that's interesting because space and time kind of overlap with the concept of utopia, which is it's commonly seen as something that is great and aspirational, but it's also no place, like literally no place, like it does not exist.
Right.
And I'm interested why you chose that, especially considering some of the more nostalgic components of people that live there, where the radio show where they're talking about the memories before playing or just after playing Cool in the Gang.
Right. Yeah. So you're asking why Detropia?
Yeah, and then also how that
Where we got
plays
the
with
name
nostalgia as well that
Right.
runs through it.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Detroit is a place that is so incredibly nostalgic. I've never met people that are so obsessed with the past, even when they're in their 20s. You know, like Crystal, who's like dreams of this place when it was, you know, Motown was at the height of its.
When it was banging.
Yeah, when it was banging, and it's just really interesting. It's a lot of the way they dress, and it's just a very nostalgic place. We were playing around with the concept of Utopia, and the name Detropia, which we invented, because the American dream was supposed to be Utopia. I mean, that's why everyone was like, you know, God, we got it going on. We actually created Utopia. You can, you know, you never go hungry, you're never cold, you're always comfortable, you always know where your next meal's coming from, your kids are going to do better than you. It's kind of, it's Utopia. So we wanted to use the word and kind of leave it up to the viewer. Detroit, was it a utopia? Can it be a utopia again? Is it a dystopia? Will it continue being a dystopia? It's something that you can kind of play with in terms of the symbolism of the film, which we didn't want to spoon feed. We just want people to kind of figure it out themselves. I mean, it's not a black and white situation. It could be all those things at the same time. So, yeah, it was just something that we felt suited the kind of movie we ended up making.
And the kind of interstitial facts that come up, what I find interesting is the way that they are, like the camera's deliberately moving, but the kind of typeface stays there. It's like it's inhabiting the space where there aren't people, there are now these numbers that exist. And I'm curious what went into that decision.
Again, you interpreted in a very fabulous and artistic way. Yeah, I mean, we just were using some of these stats just to give like basic context, and wanted them to be working in tandem to something that made sense.
Yeah.
But I like that you gave it an extra layer. You make us seem really smart.
Well, when the camera moves, you expect the text to move because you expect that it was literally just placed over top, but but it's static and it has this interesting visual effect.
Right. Well, I guess part of it is like it was actually they were married to each other, but it drove us crazy, so we stopped it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of like you want it to feel like there's some energy there. Yeah. It's a living thing. This city.
And there's also a few moments where the outside world, particularly China, kind of is used as a counterpoint. I'm interested in that specifically. Kind of was that like the Mikado that was? Yeah. Like which is obviously a very problematic text as far as like Britain specifically interpreting China and how that plays into the electric car as well.
Right. Well, it's funny. China ended up being kind of like the boogeyman there. People are talk about it a lot. It's really a symbol of a place that, expedited the demise of this place. So, tough for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting. All roads seemed to lead to China in Detroit, and we wanted to be careful with that. We didn't want to imply that all the issues that the city is facing, all the struggles, is because of China. It's one of so many things. Globalization is one, and it's all compounded. There's so many things. So people kind of have been asking us, so what was it? It's the culmination of everything that has turned this place into what it is today. It was interesting. The scrappers talked about China. There's a Chinese electric vehicle at the auto show. It just seemed to be on people's minds there.
And finally, there's kind of this move towards an small entrepreneurial spirit as a potential, one of the many potential solutions. And it's interesting that it's a film that was partially financed by Kickstarter. So I'm interested how the production of the film kind of in some ways mirrored that.
Well, actually the Kickstarter paid for the distribution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we got grants.
Yeah.
We got grants.
Well, which is another good mirror because you have Ford that's sponsoring the opera as well, right?
Right, yeah, that's true. But Ford, the auto company, has nothing to do with Ford, the foundation. They've divorced themselves.
Okay.
But, people always ask us about it. They're like, did they have creative control? And we're like, they have nothing to do with each other, guys. Yeah, I mean, it was true. We kind of took a page from our own book when we decided that we were going to distribute it ourselves, and we were going to raise the money. And we were going to go to social networking format, social fundraising. It was really fabulous, and it was something that we walked away and said, you know what? One of the lessons we learned from this film is, entrepreneurship is the new way of America. You cannot rely on big companies to support you anymore. That's being phased out, in this new world. So why don't we do it ourselves? And we were inspired by that, and we did it, and here I am in Toronto.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
What's going on in there, guys?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry. Someone needs we gotta call the ambulance.
Thanks so much. I'm Heather. We've been emailing. Sorry, I sent Patricia over.
Oh, no problem. How are you?
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.